Hey everyone, Felix from Nintendo Life here, and today we're here to review Fantasy Life I on the Nintendo Switch 1 and 2. Yes, so Fantasy Life I released on the Nintendo Switch just before the Switch 2 released. So what we've done is that firstly we'll have the review for the Switch 1 version, which will go into detail about what this game actually is, and then after that we'll have a little mini review about how the performance is on the Switch 2. This Switch 1 review was written by the wonderful Kate Gray over on NintendoLife.com and has been adapted into this video by me. The original Fantasy Life on 3DS is a cult favorite, but not a bestseller by any means. Yet, its dedicated fanbase has been proselytizing about the game for well over a decade, and it's those fans that have been hoping for the sequel for just as long. As a result, this game isn't afraid to borrow heavily from what the original laid down. But luckily, far from being a shallow, pale imitation of its predecessor, Fantasy Life I manages to update and revitalize the formula for the modern cozy gaming era. After a long and hand-holdy tutorial, you'll be thrown into the meat of what the series has to offer, choosing a life, a class, and start doing stuff with it. Crafting classes lets you make tools, furniture, weapons, etc. Gathering classes are all about finding the materials to feed into the crafting classes, which becomes easier the higher level your tools are. And combat classes, which uses weapons and armor made from the crafting classes, lets you defeat monsters and gather parts for, you guessed it, the crafting classes. It's a beautifully woven ecosystem with plenty of synergy, and swapping between lives is what most of the game is about. So far, this is more or less exactly how Fantasy Life was, and you'd be forgiven for thinking that this was just the original game with a fresh coat of paint and a new story. And well, yes, in a lot of ways that matter, it is. But also no, it's been over 10 years since the original, and in that time, we've had Animal Crossing New Horizons and Zelda Breath of the Wild, both of which have heavily influenced two new side plots. Ginormosia, Breath of the Wild-like open world with towers and shrines that work exactly like you'd expect them to, and Mystery, a New Horizons-like village that you can terraform and decorate to your heart's delight. Does that sound derivative? Sure. But they did a great job with both, and be honest, who doesn't want a Zelda meets Animal Crossing that's actually good? If Level 5 has struck upon a winning formula, we can't fault them for it, even if we are a little bit surprised by all of the similarities. Green glowing shrines with strange, unpronounceable names, a giant elderly tree being who begs you to climb into its mouth to fight off the bad guys making him sick. Come on, Level 5, you didn't even try to change the homework you copied. There are plenty of excellent quality of life changes over the original too. The ability to swap lives at any point, rather than having to go all the way back to the guild office, is a particular highlight. But there are also rideable mounts, fast travel, and swappable companions. All in all, it's a much smoother game to play than the original Fantasy Life. Fantasy Life I is the kind of game that lays out 10 billion choices in front of you and says, go wild, and one of those choices is use cash farming exploits to buy everything you'll ever need and never touch a hoe again. Those 10 billion choices have the ability to overwhelm, especially with all the interdependencies between lives, but remarkably it all feels quite zen doing your little minigames and slowly crawling your way up to the new skill tree. Besides, if you fancy a break from the lives, you can just switch over to the almost entirely separate Ginormosia to wander the lands, find towers, do shrine puzzles, complete side quests, and just generally gain a colossal pile of XP, none of which have any bearing on the main story. You could also head over to Mystery and your little village and terraform to your heart's content, decorating your lands with fountains and benches like a benevolent city councillor with an infinite budget. You could crack out tools and clothing to fulfill villager requests, or make fat stacks of money, or ask your friends to join in with the new online play feature and ignore the story entirely. Each one of those options is a lot of fun and incredibly broad, with a level of player agency and freedom that just doesn't exist in most cozy games. Admittedly, that breadth of freedom does come at a cost of Fantasy Life's signature personality. The original game had just one line of exploration, rather than this game's 3, but that meant that it was much more fleshed out. The NPCs were dripping with character, the lives had their own game-spanning plots, the areas were more distinct and self-contained, and there was just a lot more life in the world, partly because it didn't have a fast-traveling system, so you spent a lot more time in one area. In Fantasy Life I, because you're always on the go with the extremely generous fast-traveling system, the areas feel more like service areas on the motorway. You only go there to get things done before you hop back in your car and leave again. It's a good payoff in terms of value. The game is more accessible and vastly more broad, though a little more shallow. But it seems a shame to lose that distinct weirdness that made the original so beloved in the first place. It's hard to cover everything that this game does well, because there really is so much to see and do. It's beautiful, it's robust, it's got multiplayer, it's got 3 fully fledged areas to explore, it's got crafting, foraging and cooking and fishing and minigames and beautiful music, side quests, and more. It's all really, really good. Admittedly, there will always be a slight sadness in our hearts that this is not quite Fantasy Life, but Fantasy Life I is a triumph, and we've never been happier to see a sequel pull it off. So in conclusion, vastly expanding breadth at the cost of depth, Fantasy Life I, The Girl Who Steals Time, is a worthy sequel to the 3DS original, even if it does lose some of that signature level 5 weirdness in the progress. Taking its cues from Breath of the Wild and Animal Crossing might seem pretty unoriginal, but synergizing those ideas into a Fantasy Life flavored version actually works, and we can't really fault Level 5 for giving the people what they want. We here at Nintendo Life give Fantasy Life I, The Girl Who Steals Time for the Nintendo Switch a 9 out of 10. And now with the review of the Switch 1 version, let's switch to the Switch 2 review, which was written by the wonderful Ollie Reynolds. The Switch 2 version makes the overall experience even more enjoyable thanks to a small batch of noteworthy improvements to the presentation. We're mainly talking about resolution and frame rate here, so don't expect any fancy mouse controls or HD Rumble 2 or tie-ins to a mobile app. Fantasy Life I admittedly looked pretty nice and performed reasonably well on Switch 1 at around 30 frames per second. That said, the significant bump to 60 frames per second on Switch 2 is very welcome, and we can't imagine going back now. It doesn't always hit its target, particularly in larger open world environments, but we didn't get anything more serious than a few minor dips here and there. Similarly, the visuals are much crisper than before, especially noteworthy when playing in handheld mode. The blur effect is still in place around the edges of the screen, but it feels slightly toned down to allow the game's world to shine brighter than ever. You can turn this off completely if you wish, but we found the focus blur adds to the charm, kinda like Link's Awakening and to a lesser extent, Echoes of Wisdom. A small patch applied shortly after release also boosts shadow quality and the object render distance, a minor improvement, but one that further widens the gap between the versions. Load times were acceptable on Switch 1, averaging between 5 and 10 seconds, but this has been cut down significantly in the Switch 2 edition. Given how cheap the upgrade is for Switch 1 owners, you're looking at $2.59 or your regional equivalent, the performance improvements for Fantasy Life I on Switch 2 are more than worth the price of admission. Other publishers have the gall to charge full price again, looking at you Sega, but this is an acceptable middle ground. If you're keen on trying out Level 5's long-awaited sequel, this is absolutely the best way to play on a Nintendo system. We here at Nintendo Life give Fantasy Life I, The Girl Who Steals Time for the Nintendo Switch 2 a 9 out of 10.